Have you ever wondered how executives spend their time? What do they do? Why are they not doing individual contributor work? Early on in our careers, we often been very judgy of managers. They don't know anything about what we do. What do they do all day? They spend a lot of time in meetings. Then once you become a manager, you're like, I don't have any time to do the work, which we think is hands on keyboards. And as you elevate, you just spend more and more time doing. I'm here to tell you that whatever level of your career you're at, I want you to start thinking differently about being an executive. If you are early in your career, I want you to start thinking differently today to one, support your executives better, which is only going to do good things for your career, but two, get yourself ready. The sooner you start operating as an executive, the sooner you're going to get there. But if you're already an executive, let this be the wake-up call for why you are potentially losing sleepless nights, why you're feeling overworked, burnt out. Today's episode is about how executives actually operate, how they actually get stuff done. And you might be a little bit surprised. So without further ado, let's dive in to what it is that you actually should be spending your time on as an executive. The most important side of what an executive does is strategic thinking. A great executive has directs under her who execute, who make sure that their teams deliver on strategy. Those directs will often feed up strategic ideas. They'll often say that's unworkable, but they are responsible for fulfilling a strategy that's been developed by you as an executive. If, as an executive, you're focused on immediate goals, you're focused on turning around a failing team, which is a very important thing. That should be a strategic directive if your team is failing. But if you're focused on the running of the business rather than the strategy of the business, you'll do well for a short period of time, and then you won't. A business stays stagnant when everybody is just focused on execution. You need people focused on what's next at all times. And that has to be driven by the executives. That is kind of the job description. So if you find yourself spending all your time running things, dealing with fires, which we talked about last time, tactical operations, lots and lots of meetings. And there is a place for meetings as an executive, don't get me wrong, but we have far too many. I can promise your business is not doing as well as it should do. All too often, this is why businesses fail or struggle. It's because the executives are doing the wrong work. So today, I want to take you through 4, maybe 5 different ways of thinking to help you do the right work. Are you ready for this? Let's do it. Let me start with a story. There's a client that my team is working with. I'm not actually working directly with this lady. I've just had some amazing conversations with her, but she's coached by one of my other coaches. And I had a coffee chat with her recently to just catch up on what was going on, because I like to do this. I like to check in with everybody, even if I'm not their coach. And she said she spends a lot of time being afraid that her team are going to forget their goals. This woman is a CTO. She has a team of, I think, over 300 under her. But she spends so much time, because she inherited a failing team, being afraid that her team would forget their goals. She's always reminding them of their goals. And I'm a huge believer in reminding your team of your goals. But it was all she seemed to be doing. Digging in deeper with her, she'd always held goals for her team since she took them over about a year ago. She'd be the one approving change requests. And I'm like, wait, hold on. You're the one managing change requests for a team of 300? What's going on there? She did that because otherwise the team was liable to have scope creep. And so she was responsible for approving change requests. But rather than dealing with the scope creep problem, which is an attitude issue, we're just going to delay this attitude issue, she maintained control. She was afraid to let go of how her team operated because she was afraid of them failing. And I just know this means that team isn't going anywhere. She's triaged. She's triaged exceptionally well in 12 months. But she now needs to do the work of making that team operate without her. Her first 12 months, her responsibility was to turn around a failing engineering team. That's what the company needed. That was her focus and strategy. That should not be what she does for the rest of the time as CTO. What she now needs to do is focus on what that team should be doing without her, so she can up level and think about what engineering needs to be doing at 2, 5, even longer out than that. What they're going to do if they're ever going for acquisition, what they're going to do with competitors, how are they going to stay operating as a great engineering org. You've got to let go of being involved in every decision as an engineer. And that applies to every executive out there. So let me take you through some of the things that I teach every one of my executives. And some come with some of this, but it isn't well honed and refined. Basically, all of this stuff we hone and refine with every single executive I work with. And this is what led one of my clients I've been working with for 10 months now go from being on a PIP, told that she wasn't going anywhere. She wasn't actually an executive when she came to work with me, but she was on a PIP and she was freaking out. She came to me for job hunting, but we triaged because she just didn't have the mental capacity to job hunt. 10 months later, she's still in the company. She's been promoted twice. 3 weeks ago, she was handed 80% of the company's revenue functions by the CEO. What did she do? Everything I'm about to tell you. All right, let's dive in. First things first, the strategic pause. Oh, I just love this. You got to stop responding to all of the things. As an executive, it is important that you respond quickly and regularly, but if you are constantly in Slack, constantly responding to emails and you just bang things back, you aren't giving good responses. I can pretty much guarantee it. You're going to be missing context. You're focused on getting it off your plate. It is tactical execution. And it gets worse. If you are the fast responder, and I'm talking minutes and a couple of hours rather than a day, if you're that fast responder, your team learns that you expect to respond. That does two things. One, they don't solve problems for themselves. Two, they think they can't solve problems for themselves. There's this weird thing that happens. I've personally experienced this where I've had such a responsive boss, I think I'm not allowed to make decisions. If it comes across accidentally, but you suddenly think, I have to escalate that because every time I escalate, I always get a response. The strategic pause is about slowing down, going back to basics and asking yourself, can I step back a little bit from this? How can I slow down my responses? What if I just set aside a week for strategic thinking and told your team you weren't going to be available for interruptions? Most of you will have a panic thinking that. What new items or perspectives are you going to get if you have strategic thinking time, even just a couple of hours in the morning? You need to regularly think about slowing down, not answering everything, and having a strategic pause to allow your team to breathe, but also allow you to not be responsive. When you're not responsive, you are hopefully not distracted by all the notifications. Remember all the time management stuff. Every time you get distracted by a notification, by something coming in on Slack, by YouTube, by whatever it is, a cup of tea landing near your desk, it takes you 20 minutes to refocus. So if you were checking your email, your IMs, your phone more frequently than every 20 minutes, you are never focused. Never. And this is the problem with how most of us operate today. We don't actually get into deep focus mode, which means everything else is really, really hard to do. And we actually make less good decisions. You need to let go of being responsive, and you need to give time for that stuff to work on its own without you being involved. That is part of being a leader. The second thing, and maybe this should have been first, but I think the strategic pause is possibly the most important thing you can do. So that had to go first. But number 2, know the difference between strategy and tactics. Most of us don't know the difference. And I would say, myself included, that strategy does not come easy to most humans. It's a very unusual, natural trait. To be strategic, I actually think requires your brain to be wired differently, like naturally strategic. You don't think about the stuff right here, right now. You don't think about the how to. You think longer out. You think about all the routes and ways of things being operated. And actually, somebody who's like that seems a little bit out of touch with the rest of us. So socially, if you are naturally strategic, you don't actually tend to get on very well with many people, right? I say this as somebody who is married to a strategist. I am naturally very tactical, very logistics oriented. But because I've been an executive, I have taught myself strategy. I use tactics to give myself strategic imperatives. I'll be very tactical, but thinking a long way out. And that is it's a very good approximation for strategy. My husband would argue differently, but we often get to the same conclusion. We just approach it different ways of thinking about it. You've got to think big picture. You've got to get out of this thing that you're responsible for and think bigger scope. You've got to use that to make your decision. So rather than should I do A or B because of what's here, right now, you've got to think, if I do A, what are the ramifications 5 years down the line? If we invest in this, what does that mean for our long-term spending? It's things such as, we're not going to give you headcount today because we don't have the money for it, versus we know that this team, if we invest in them today, can do this slot in the next year, this not in the next 5 years. A lot of decisions by executives are very reactive and very tactical. You've got to become strategic about how you make decisions, how you allocate resources, and how you even allocate the resources you use for thinking. So here are 3 great questions you're going to be asking yourself to understand if you're more strategic or tactical, and slow yourself down. 1, am I spending more time on tactical tasks than strategic planning? Are you spending more time answering emails? Are you spending more time executing on the current week's, month's goals than strategic planning? Why? Why are you doing that? What's the pressure? Where is the pressure coming from? What is going on? Most of the time, it's because we don't feel comfortable handing over execution to someone else. If you're lower down in your org, you still need to spend some time strategic planning. The percentage of your time just shifts. So then you ask yourself question 2, how can I shift my focus from immediate right here, right now tasks to bigger picture and organization goals? What do I need to emotionally let go of? What fear, what anxiety, what pressure do I need to let go of? And what do I need to get excited about? I love to think of both prongs. I get very excited about the big picture, and so that's typically enough. But if I've got anxiety around something getting done, I get too easily distracted away from my hard strategic thinking. Strategic thinking uses a lot of cognition. It is exhausting. You need to be well nourished, well slept, well fed, well watered. You need to have your emotional soul filled up. If you're anxious about something else on your to-do list, you're going to struggle to move to strategic thinking and those big picture goals. So ask yourself, what is the negative stuff that's keeping you in the weeds, keeping you in the right here, right now tactical, the fires, the people, the whatever it is, and what's the excitement that's going to drive you towards that big picture? You need both things, I personally think. And then question number 3, what strategic opportunities am I currently overlooking because I'm too focused on day-to-day operations? I love to ask this question in a coaching session, and we will quite often spend an entire coaching session diving into this. And by the end of it, a client is just, wow, we need to go and work at this as a company, because if we don't, we're not going to be competitive in a year or two's time. It is such a great question to be asking. You've got to slow down to ask this question about, what are you overlooking? What about the market? What about the way your team is thinking and operating? What about competitors? What about just new innovations coming in your line of technology? Or, I mean, even if you're not in tech, maybe you're an HR leader listening to this because you work in a tech company. What new innovations are coming in HR that you could bring in to your company, but you're overlooking it because you're just too in the weeds? Ask yourself that question. I love those 3 questions for just getting you back to, let's just be more strategic, because it can get you really excited. Okay, the third thing I want you to be doing to start operating more as an executive in terms of how you use your time is empowering your team. Now, we've talked about this before, but you can never empower your team enough, I don't think. You can trust your team and have that abused, but your team should always be empowered. There just have to be boundaries. That doesn't mean you're not empowering them. The boundaries don't reduce the empowerment. The boundaries actually enhance empowerment. The boundaries say, you can go here. If you want to go further, come ask me. Let's have a chat about that. Again, this comes back to the client I was talking about at the beginning, the CTO. Her team weren't empowered to own their goals because she thought they didn't spend enough energy on it. Rather than she thought she was doing them a favor by holding goals, always reminding them of their goals. She was saying to me, like, if I don't do this, it's not going to work. And I was like, well, but as a CTO, that is not your job. Your job is not to hold the goals for them. Your job is to tell them how they should be holding their goals. Your job is to make sure they're empowered to hold them themselves and empowered to understand the consequences. Well, she was holding the goals for them, and she probably still is. I need to catch up with her. It's been 3 weeks. But if you're holding the goals for someone, you're disempowering them. You're saying, I've got you. Don't you worry about it. I'll make sure you do that. That's not empowerment at all. So what we have to do is think of, like, what are you doing to up-level your team? Okay, this comes back to the client resource, the other client I was telling you about, who has been promoted twice in 10 months. Every time she's had the 2 promotions, but she's also just been given a lot more responsibility, including this 80% of the revenue functions. And the first thing I say to her, I was like, well done. That's amazing. Congratulations. We'll have like lots of clapping and I'm just so excited for it. And then I'm like, so how are you up leveling your team? And she's like, I knew you were going to ask me that, Tony. Because for her to up level and take on more, her team has to up level. They have to own more of what they do. They have to own more of the decision making. They have to own more of the problem solving. They have to own more of being responsible for delivering. They have to own more of the business case, more of the revenue case. They have to own more. So what are you doing to level up your team? How are you delegating? How are you giving responsibilities? How are you encouraging autonomy? Have you made it super clear where the boundaries are? If your team oversteps and makes a decision you wouldn't get behind, that is a sign that you need good boundaries. You are going to do that. I've done that. Even with my current team, I should be like super experienced at this point. Every now and then I'm like, oh, they made that decision. Right. I didn't actually want them to make that decision. And I'll ask myself, is that because I didn't tell them where the line was that they had to escalate such a decision to me? Or was it because that is their responsibility, but I don't like the decision? Then if it's because I don't like the decision, I ask myself, is that really a problem? Because sometimes good decisions by someone else aren't bad decisions. They're just uncomfortable. So is it genuinely a bad decision or is it just uncomfortable? If it's uncomfortable, I dig into why. If it's a bad decision, and bad comes in many formats, right? It could be bad for the business, which is a problem, but it can also be bad as in it doesn't align with our mission, values, ethics, something. It doesn't align with something that's important to the way this company operates, right? And so I'll dig into what's going on. And then I'll say, well, what guardrails did I have in place? Why did the team not know that? And I'll have an honest discussion as to why that went about. And the more often than not, in fact, I don't think I've ever had a conversation where I've gone through the guardrails with someone, where we're going through, like, why did you make the decision? How did you make it? And the team member genuinely knew that they shouldn't have done. Like, it always comes down to a misunderstanding. And what it does is it gives me a much better place to make better guardrails, better informed information from my team that say, this is why we make decisions this way. And then they go and they make so many great decisions. They make decisions I wouldn't make. And they'll come to me and say, we've made this decision. I'm like, oh, wow. And then they talk me through it. And I'm like, that is an amazing decision. And it would take me longer to get there because I don't understand everything they know. So level up your team, level up their ownership of everything. Encourage autonomy in every aspect. If you find you don't trust your team, like this client of ours who held the goals for her engineers, not just her engineers, These were senior leaders in engineering. She's the CTO. Guess who's reporting into her? She was holding goals for them. If you're doing something like that, there is something wrong with your leadership, my love. You need to stop doing that, and you need to figure out how. So here are some questions to ask yourself about empowering your team. How can you better empower your team to own their goals and responsibilities? Why are they not owning them? Why do they think it's acceptable to miss deadlines? Why do they think that that you're the one that needs to remind them? If you are afraid that if you don't remind them, they're going to drop it, why? How do you make it clear to them without reminding them every single week that they need to take ownership of that and report in every single week to you on it, right? Second question, what am I holding on to that could be delegated? This is a biggie. You are never done delegating. If you are growing, you're taking on more stuff, you need to delegate more. This is how companies grow and evolve. It's why, although, we can have an argument about whether or not we should be in a growth-based society because of what that's doing to the planet, humans are always going to grow because we get bored with status quo. That means that you always need to be looking at what in your responsibility should be delegated and allow your team to grow. And then third question, how can I create an environment where my team feels confident to make decisions without my constant input? How can you back them up when they make a bad decision? How can you debrief when you disagree with a decision? How can you make sure your team feels like my boss has got my back? Only then are you truly empowering your team. Okay, next section. I love this one. Overcoming your fear of letting go. Letting go of control, letting go of ownership, such as the CTO who held on to the goals. She was fearful that her team would drop the goals if she let go of them, if she let them own them. I truly believe this comes down to trust, you trusting them. Here's the thing about trust, though. Trust doesn't just happen. It has to be earned. But if nobody's trusting anybody, no trust is earned. Somebody has to start with the presumption of trust. It's why I talk to all my leaders, assume trust. You have to put your fears aside. You have to put on your big girl pants, right? You have to put your fears aside and trust your team and show them that you trust them, even when you've got no evidence to do so. Show them that you trust them. You don't have to give them the crown jewels, but let go a little bit and show them that you're letting go. Give them clear boundaries around what you expect. Give them feedback. Give them the guardrails I was just talking about. And then see what happens, and then give feedback. And in the giving of the feedback, you're going to build trust because you're going to hear why something didn't go the way you wanted it to, which builds, hopefully, you should then trust them more because they're able to have an honest conversation with you. And if you do it right, they trust you more because you're not vilifying them. You're saying, let me understand what happened here. It's not how I would have made this decision, but it doesn't make it wrong. Let's understand how you made that decision. I'm going to explain how I would have made this decision, and let's figure out a path forward. That builds immense trust. So you've got to get over your fear of letting go. You've got to trust yourself. You've got to trust your team. You've got to understand why you are not trusting your team. 3 questions to help you. Why am I fearful of letting go? What fears do I have? Are they based on past experience? What assumptions are there? What am I afraid of letting go of? And where does that come from? Question number 2. How can I work on building this trust with my team? How can I use that to alleviate my concerns? How can I use trust to build my team's confidence? And then 3rd question. How can I start today? What small steps can I start to delegate more effectively and get out of my comfort zone? What can I do to get rid of this thing I'm afraid of letting go of and just give a small piece over today to build confidence in my team's abilities and a little bit of trust? Baby steps. That's what I'm asking for. Build on baby steps. That's where the trust comes from. Okay. The next piece I want you to be thinking about as an executive is auditing your time. Let me tell you about a different client. This executive, I worked with her a couple of years ago, and she came to me. She works late into the night, overwhelmed by demands on her. She would always work to 9 p.m. and always work weekends, and it was often much later, right? And she was involved in every single decision. She had no time to be strategic. She was that person who held on to everything. She was so deeply involved in approving every change, believing that her team's success depended on her oversight. She was so burnt out, struggled with everything. Her family, she actually got divorced not long before I met her. And I don't know if it impacted her. If that was that the chicken or the egg, I don't know, but I can't help that think that it was related. Because if you're working that hard, the rest of your life is going to suffer. And I say this as somebody who loves her job. I would work more hours than I do if I didn't know better, which is it will burn me out and it will mean I suffer in other aspects. I need my personal life to fill me up so I can do this, so I can turn up and coach my heart out and feel filled up by my clients and remember what they say rather than like, which client is this? If I don't have that time to nourish myself with my family, I don't do as good a job. I know I don't. I've got the data to back it up. And this is what was happening with this client of mine. She came to me knowing things were broken. She was burnt out. And so what we decided to do was a strategic time audit. We looked at, I actually get people to do time tracking, which basically everybody hates, but this is when we're in a dire situation. I'm a huge believer in time tracking. I do it myself once a quarter. How am I spending my time? A lot of my clients resist it. It's not necessary, but when you're in a really bad place, it gets the data very, very quickly. She realized she was spending all of her time making decisions. Too much time on things that could be handled by others, micro decisions. So what we did was we took the time to break this down, understand it, and then we implemented my final thing that I'm going to share with you today, which is the 30-60-10 rule. 30% of her time on immediate tasks that required her. I always say to my team, if it doesn't require my face, my voice, or my brain, I don't need to be doing it. And they always laugh. My face, my voice, and my brain. And as an executive, that's how you need to think. Your face, because sometimes you have to be the face of something, whether you like it or not. And I always try and elevate my team to be more of a face, but this is the Tony Collis brand, so sometimes it has to be me. This podcast is me, for example. It is my baby. But my voice, because again, does it need to come from me for the authority, but more important, the brain. This podcast is mine because it's my ideas, my coaching, my stuff. And it's same with my coaching, like my team. I mean, I've trained some amazing coaches, don't get me wrong. I'm so proud of them. And some of them are better than me, but sometimes I am the one that needs to be coaching, right? And I would say as an executive, if it doesn't require your brain, that you cannot delegate this. You genuinely cannot. Nobody else can solve this because nobody has the picture you do. This is not something you've elevated somebody into yet. That needs your brain. Your voice and your face should be less important as an executive than they are in a brand like mine. But there are times when they need the executive on stage, when they need the executive at the client office, when the executive has to talk to the entire team. It is not sufficient for it to be the person under you sharing this announcement. They need a fireside chat. That's a skip level thing, whatever it is. Sometimes it is literally that you have that position of authority. It is required. So 30% of your time needs to be spent on doing the immediate stuff that requires your face, voice, or brain. 30%. And this is what this client did. 60% of her time, 60% of your time is then spent on strategic initiatives. Oh, 60%. Some of you are like turning in your future graves right now. How could I possibly be spending 60%? That's 3 days of my week working on strategy. I know, it's scary, isn't it? But then 10% goes into long-term vision planning. So it's very related to that 60. So kind of 70%, 3.5 days a week are not operations. I have a client at the moment. We've been working together for 3 months. And I said this to her a couple of weeks ago. And we've been working on removing her workload. She's a COO, a new COO, but a COO, and we've been reducing her workload. And she's like, Tony, I don't understand what I should be doing with my time now. You freed this up, now what? Like, strategy. She's like, I don't know what to do with that. So we've got a couple of strategy sessions booked on the calendar. We actually did a whole day together recently to help deal with this, because she's like, I've never operated in this way. I think especially for somebody in operations, we think operations, that is tactical. No. As an executive, you need to be thinking about the operations you need in 2 years' time. Where is your HR going to have to grow to? What is your office size going to need to grow to? Are you going to become a remote company? Are you going to become a hybrid company? How are you responding to regulations? What regulations do you see coming down the lane? There's so many things in ops that are strategic. And you need to be spending time on that. So whatever your role as an executive, and even if you're lower down, I want you spending more time on strategy than you think. So 30, 60, 10 is the rule. This is what my client did a couple of years ago. And her team flourished under this. She flourished, they flourished. The company went on to a future acquisition where this woman got the payout of her life and is now retired. That's why I don't work with her anymore. 30, 60, 10. 30% on immediate tasks. 60% on strategic initiatives, 10% for long-term vision planning and goal setting. 30, 60, 10. This is what I want you to be thinking of moving forward. These things that I've just covered with you today. The strategic pause, stop being so reactive. Understand what tactics are and so what strategy is. Empower the hell out of your team. If you don't trust your team, deal with that. Maybe you need to rehire, but you need to build trust with your team, which allows you to then let go of the fears. You have to let go. And then when you do that, you need to do a time audit to see what the hell you're doing with your time. And then finally, implement the 30, 60, 10 rule of your time. If you can do this, you will be operating as that next level leader who is going to change the world. This next level executive who is genuinely ready to do the big things. I would love to know how you get on with this. There's so much good stuff in this episode. This is stuff I love teaching. So I would love to know how you're getting on. Drop me a note on LinkedIn and share with me, does this work for you? How does 30, 60, 10 feel? Have you ever spent that much time being strategic? Shoot me your questions. I love doing episodes based on questions I get from listeners. Until next time, remember, keep being amazing. Keep doing what you're doing. Only then are we going to change the world, by empowering each and every woman in tech, ourselves and those around us. Bye for now.